Successful Minds with Patricia Baronowski-Schneider, the show that takes you around the world to share interviews with some of the most successful and relevant people on the planet. Hear their stories and get the most important business lessons they have learned on their road to success and get exclusive advice on how to implement their success into your life and business. Successful Minds with Patricia Baronowski-Schneider is brought to you by the Strategic Advisor Board and your host, Patricia Baronowski-Schneider.
Hello and welcome back to Successful Minds. I'm your host, Patty Baronowski-Schneider, CEO of Pristine Advisors. Today I'm joined by Jesse Tayler of True Anon. Our topic today focuses on software and apps and the badge of trust situation on Twitter. So thank you for joining us, Jesse.
Well, thank you for having me, Patricia. I appreciate your time. And I also have seen your show, so it's nice to be, both an audience and now helping tell stories.
Oh, well, thank you. Now, tell us a little bit about yourself.
My background is really software inventor. I got kind of an early start in my career on that. So I was a kid who was interested in soldering things and working on computer chips. And it was kind of a time where, these things were still at their rather basic form, which today it's an interesting reality that my friend just purchased a laptop with 67 billion transistors.
Wow.
But the computers that, we were putting on the desk in those very early PC days, the Motorola 68K, as it's called, had a whopping 68,000 of these transistors. So, it was a perfect time really to get involved as a young person. It was just a little out of reach, but really interesting stuff.
Right. Wow. You're definitely going back in the time, huh?
Well, that's where my gray hair comes in these days.
Well, I'm right behind you. Don't feel bad. Now, what inspired you to develop the first app store and the revolutionary identity solution?
That's interesting. These two very different things, the App Store and identity, you wouldn't think they have much in common. There's actually interesting similarities between these two kinds of inventions. And really, since the 80s, we're describing, we've been going through a digital transition, right? Everything that we know has music and books and all of these things have become digital. And certainly the App Store is part of that. So the App Store took something that we used to do in the real world, right? We'd drive to a store called Egghead, you'd buy a box, you'd take it home, and you'd have to install it yourself. And what we did is we made that entirely digital, right? And this removes fraud and waste, but most of all, time.
Mm-hmm.
It is effectively instantaneous, right? We don't care how many people download Pokemon Go at a time, right? And this transitioned that industry until today, right? I don't think you can buy software in a box.
No,
right?
I don't think it's all downloaded.
I don't know. Yeah, even video games are all streamed, right? So electronic distribution simply had unstoppable benefits.
Mm-hmm.
And although it was some problem to solve, once you had done so, this was kind of an unstoppable transition. So TrueAnon, not QAnon, by the way, it's the opposite. TrueAnon is just a simple tool. It helps social media and profile-based sites create and maintain trust, right? It's anti-fake profile software. So the way it does this is the unique thing. Instead of reviewing private documents, typically things that you get from the government, like a driver's license or passport or something, you can instead confirm and connect various digital things that you already own, right? We already have an email from our school or our work.
Right.
We use blogs and social media to showcase what? Our digital lives, right? This is our digital identity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we let you confirm and control how other people view and share it. And when it's available to anyone, a profile badge that is unknown is really just as clear as one with a rank and score. And it's this transparency that builds trust. So whether it's on Twitter or on, Craigslist or on a dating service where I might need a great deal of privacy, even anonymity.
Right. Yeah.
I can prove that I am who I am, and that's effectively automatic for Twitter, right?
Okay.
It's automatic because as many people want to do it at once, doesn't matter.
Right.
And so similarly, the traditional industry of verifying identity will transition to a purely digital solution, and of course, we hope that will be ours.
Now, is that the same as like I have the facial recognition on my phone? Is that the similar thing, like verifying that it's me who's doing that, or this is something totally different?
A little bit. Identity is one of these words that serves a number of purposes. A login, perhaps it refers to private information, private documents and their storage. In this case, it's really just the question, is this person who they say, right? So is this dating profile a person that maintains 1,000 of these? Is it really a person here? Are they really looking to sell this car or this iPod or this laptop? Or is this a scam, And so it's really for social things, peer marketplaces, as a parent, you have to go to a website to hire a nanny.
Right.
And everything we do now is online, and knowing who we're talking to and legitimacy is really the question that we're trying to answer.
Well, that's awesome, because nowadays, I mean, we just had this conversation the other day, there's just scammers everywhere. And, it's funny, I was sitting with my sister this weekend, and I'm just sitting there, and she's on Facebook, and she says, "You changed your profile?" I'm like, "I did what?" "It's a bunch of Pakistanis with guns." I'm sitting right here, and I'm like, I'm not even on my phone. Well, they changed my profile. They changed everything. Luckily, she happened to be on it and saw it. So I was able to get them off, change my password. But for me to now verify who I am, I had to go through so much. And I'm like, but these guys got a red carpet to change my stuff. I'm like, but yeah, and that's a big thing now. They take over other people's profiles and then try to scam them. But proving that this person is legit is, and the world nowadays with so many scammers, that's really important. So that's awesome that you're doing that.
It really is. It's grown up from sort of pickpocket crimes to, this is rocking democracies, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is the fundamental fraud that is being perpetrated. So it really is a global problem. Right.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm like, especially social media, which, like you say, everybody's digital, everybody's on this, and it's just nonstop. It's a sad world.
It is, but it's a world that we're forced to live in, right?
Yeah.
So, that's the reality. We have to secure it.
Now, can you tell us more about how the revolutionary identity solution disrupts the economics underlying scams involving fake profiles?
Identity fraud online is actually frighteningly simple business. There's really only two ways to do it. You're either purchasing private information, right? I buy your whatever you just submitted to get through a gate. I steal that later to pass the same gate. So that's a whole industry in itself. Right. The other side of it is really what we were touching on with romance scam, right? This idea that you have a cost to maintain vast numbers of disposable profiles, right? This is what's going on Craigslist, right? When you go on there and you're a legitimate person trying to buy something or sell something or find a date, even back when they used to allow that, right? You're showered with a lot of fake stuff. And this is because a very, 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 very small number of bad actors is actually outmaneuvering all of us legitimate members, because they view this service as a vehicle for their crime. It's a way to filter victims, right? So being able to puppet many, many accounts is essentially an economic mechanism. So if you don't use private information, the value of stealing it drops back down to zero, where it should be, right? Your social security number was never worth anything until we started using it to key off you. It's just to identify your insurance. Nobody needs that.
It's insane. It is, like you said, it's just so
we
easy.
make our own problem like that. And you can only confirm digital properties once with TrueAnon. So there's no way to maintain multiple profiles. If you return to a service for which you were banned for badly, you couldn't return. So these are not things that you can do when you verify private documents. And it really is the essence of the problem that we're talking about. How do I know that this is not a fake profile when they seem to be the majority? And how can I assert my own legitimacy without having to surrender private information and undergo a review process over and over and over, right? Every time I want to be a nanny and find a new family to work with, I have to go through another invasive background check. It's miserable.
No, and it's true. You feel like you're being punished and you're the good guy. Meanwhile, like I said, the bad guys roll out the red carpet for him. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. We need to give the tools to legitimate people.
Nice. Now, what challenges did you face when demoing the first app store to Steve Jobs in 1993?
Well, first of all, in 1993, I was a lot younger. After Steve's passing, it did occur to me that, there's not going to be any more Steve Jobs demos of anything. And that was just sort of interesting. But people would ask, isn't Steve Jobs mean? Or what if he didn't like, what if he didn't like it or something? Perhaps I was young, but I knew what I was saying. And if he didn't agree, well, that's because he would have been wrong.
Exactly.
So luckily, as we know, he did like it. So that was fine. I think I got away appropriately given my 21 years of age or whatever it was.
Well, you have a great story to tell with that, so that's awesome.
It's funny because I had a number of startups that involved Steve Jobs, which people like to talk about. And the App Store was not one that it wasn't a particularly interesting demo or story, right? Nobody cared until the iPhone, which is, of course, 20 years later. And the real end of that transition, right? That was the time where you're like, okay, this is now the only way. So it's interesting to see how different inventions are viewed at the beginning of their arc than at the point where they are, fully accepted.
Yeah, you figure back then, everything was new, like you said, go from the old phones, to, back then the computers were like, now you could do everything on a phone. Things have evolved and people's expectations are different. So, yeah.
I had to do that software on a computer that had 68,000 transistors on it.
So you kept
not
busy.
67 billion.
People have no idea. I love when I talk to people and they're like, well, what was business like back when you started? And I'm like, this was even back in school. This was pre-internet, pre-cell phones. I got to physically go to a library. We had to physically print out flip charts for presentations. I'm like, you guys have no clue how easy you have it now. God forbid we printed out this flip chart and there was a typo. It's like, you just click a button, boom, it gets distributed to people around the world. It's definitely made life easier.
It sure has. It's changed business and it's clearly made our economy more efficient and effective. It clearly has.
Yeah. Now, what's been the most rewarding part of developing these revolutionary technologies?
Well, I think, for software inventors, maybe it's the same for composers. I have musician friends who want to create, some piece of music that people will be emotionally touched by after their, after their passing. I think For me, certainly the driver ever since I was a kid was to make something that people use. I love tinkering. I love these things, but what I wanted to do was make something that had a business purpose, that had a value in the world, such that long after I were gone, people would be using that software. So I think that's probably the core motivator. It has to be, because you really don't know anything about what's going to happen. You're creating these things at a time where people fundamentally don't understand them, and that's the way you live, right? It's only when you start getting older, people say, "Oh, well, that's an interesting invention," but that was so long ago for me that I hardly recall. And,
you were ahead of the times, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm lucky that the world changes that fast. I'm lucky at this stage in my life that I get to tell some stories that people can understand.
But it's good that you have the attitude of wanting to create something that people will use, because it's not like you're trying to create something, just because you like it. You have this extended vision of what will people use in 5 years from now, 10 years from now, how could this possibly benefit, and that's where, these, what's the word I'm looking for? These successful people, they have that vision, which is what's needed. Nice. Now, what advice would you give to entrepreneurs who are looking to bring their own revolutionary ideas to life?
Yes, you'd think I would have some strong advice. There's a Steve Jobs quote, something like, I prefer the revolutionary things. There's always a time where everyone tells you that you've completely failed. And I think this is just exactly what we were just describing. If I could enumerate inventions that we use today, even the ones that I was involved with, and show you the pitch, right? Show you what people's reaction to it was. Right. Geo-based food delivery may seem obvious when you have a cell phone with Grubhub. But when you showed somebody on a desktop computer in the 1990s that they could get a pizza delivered, they would say, oh, let me show you this invention. It's right here. It's called the telephone, okay? And I pick it up and, oh, hello.
You have to dial it like this.
Please. Yeah, and you would have to sit there and watch this VC or whatever. So, if you're bringing a revolutionary idea, you should expect that people are not just going to laugh at it. You may be, you may receive violent opposition. People are a little incredulous, perhaps. You're wasting their time. So be prepared that people are going to hate your inventions, but also be prepared to be realistic about what it is and what it does, and how soberingly difficult it can be to shepherd these things to market and to help people understand, right? You have this vision, and it seems very peculiar to you why other people would not understand something about it or understand something else about it. So it's a difficult challenge, because your job is an inventor, not a communicator. But
I was just thinking that too. Yeah, because some people you have to know your skill. So if you're the inventor, the technical person, blah, 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 you're so focused on doing that, you might not have that people skill to, say, market the thing or know how to get it out there. And that's where sometimes you have to just explain your story, but then you focus on what you do best and let somebody else do what they do best. And, it's funny, I actually saw a little video the other day, which I was actually surprised by, but it made sense, where you're saying you have to be prepared. You might get knocked down. You might get told no. One of the things was about parents telling their kids, you're so smart, you're just perfect. You're the smartest kid. And they're saying, don't do that, because what happens is the kids start thinking we're so smart that they don't ever want to be told they're not, so they won't take chances. So you have to tell them, you tried your best and I love you for it, but don't be afraid to try stuff. You might make mistakes, you might fail, but you still did great. And I was like, that is true, because people need to take chances. You might not always get it right, but it always takes that person to have that vision to, get where you have to go.
Wow, that's really inspiring. I don't know if you've ever seen Ken Burns, who does documentaries for PBS, but he did this series on baseball. I don't know a lot about baseball, but I love passion. And there was this moment when this guy was saying, I love baseball. We in baseball revere the greats, those who step up to the plate and fail 7 out of every 10 times. And I thought, hey, I kind of like baseball.
Yeah, because you don't have to be right all the time. At least just 3 out of the 10, you're good.
And you must step up and swing. There's no play without that. Okay, so you could leave it to somebody else if that's your style.
And you just have that dream that'll never happen because someone else will do it, and you could just spend your entire life with that dream, and just, so take a chance.
Frustrated and sad, yes.
Yeah, for sure. Now, what have been some of the biggest lessons you learned throughout your career when it comes to developing revolutionary technologies?
Well, I think, sticking with it, but also one of the things that is interesting to me about TrueAnon is that it is effectively an invention of ignorance. Mm-hmm. That is to say, had you hired me and said, could you solve this identity problem? I assure you that I would have looked up how other people do it.
Right. Yeah, you got to start somewhere, right?
Instead, I was probably bothered by politics in the United States, or just, getting ripped off on Craigslist while trying to find housing for the kids during COVID, right? You just had to get out of the city. And I thought to myself, this is really frustrating.
For sure.
If I had known that person was a fraudster selling, properties in every town at every price with answers to all your questions, right? I mean, you just scraped Airbnb and set up a script that made 1 million of these things and filtered us as one of the suckers. And so yeah, there's a vision, there's reality, there's bringing all of that stuff to be. It's just, I think for TrueAnon, it's the first thing that I've ever been involved with that has the effect of saving people's lives. And so by being able to think of some ways that we could confirm our identity that didn't involve surrender of private information, it turns out that you can also solve a bunch of other interesting problems, which is very much like that first app store. It solved more problems than we really understood, because we were so buried in the minutia of trying to convince even developers didn't want to be involved. They had just worked on their box and their book and the rest of these properties that they thought were what people really wanted to buy. So it's hard to be involved in change like that.
Yeah, so I guess it's one of those things where you saw that there was a need for it. Maybe everybody doesn't see it. You still need that one person who, it's almost like you have a vested interest. You've been there, you've done that. You just need to fix it. And eventually someone will come on board.
It's hard to know when the thinking starts. It's an irony that I probably could have created what is TrueAnon in the 1990s, but maybe it took till today before the urgency of those thoughts, became a reality. There was a point where I began to say, this could be possible. And, you run through a lot of actor scenarios in your head. I'm a logical person. I'm a scientist. So a great deal of time was sort of thinking, does this really keep me safe?
Yeah.
What if somebody hacked onto Craigslist years from now and stole their database? How could I assure that no one will ever attach my identity to that post that I made in the Craigslist naughty section or whatever it is? anonymity and legitimacy are so fundamentally important.
Right.
And really, it's an honor to sort of think that if I could shepherd this to market, it could have the effect of saving people's lives. I mean, these crimes are not pickpocket crimes. This is extortion. This is rape and murder.
Sure.
And if you think the services we use want that, they don't. This is a tremendous cost. This is a tremendous cost. The cost of bad actors is probably trillions of dollars on our economy.
Yeah, no, it is terrible. I mean, I've, been there myself. I've seen it with so many people. I mean, even elderly people, somebody hacks their phone. My mom herself, they've hacked her bank account. I mean, these are people, what is she living on Social Security? I mean, you take all the money in her bank. I mean, and the banks are always, not my problem. It's crazy. And that's just a handful of people. This is happening around the world in every aspect. It's bad.
I know. When it was a pickpocket, you had to sort of face your victim.
Right.
You had to be there. You could only have one at a time.
Right.
Now you can stretch your pickpocketing all the way across the world.
Right. And they're only going to take the money in your pocket as opposed to every penny in your account,
It's a business. Crime Incorporated.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, they view these services as a vehicle for their crime. When we view it as a way to buy an iPod or find a date or hire a nanny.
Right.
It's infuriating.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this kind of ties into that, but what impact do you hope to make with the revolutionary identity solution?
Well, it does tie into that. And, we began the conversation about Twitter, Elon Musk. I think one of the many things that he might not have realized is that if you let anybody apply for a badge on Twitter, even if you charge a few bucks, the number, the volume of millions of profiles to be put into a review system, it's like trying to get your software update out to egghead stores across the country and the world.
Right.
The amount of time it would take for you to get your review is about 22 years, even if you hired the biggest company out there to review it.
Right.
And so that's why he opened it, closed it, raised the price, changed the rules. And for us, I had a lot of people say, hey, I had invested a lot of my identity into Twitter, and now I didn't really quite realize it's a company. People can buy it and sell it.
Isn't
and that's
crazy?
part of me. And I didn't quite realize that now my identity, my stuff is part of the value, is part of what's being bought and sold.
Right.
And he's changed the thing. If you are a person who earned a badge in years past,
right,
that now you can just buy, you're actually not happy. That's not the deal that you had, and you wish you could take it all back, but you can't.
Right.
So people want to be able to separate the identity from the account we use just as much as the services want to separate the liability and privacy and review stuff, which doesn't help them either. So,
no, but even any type of identity security is important, because there's not enough, just for example, if you ever check your credit report, it shows me listed as, now I'm born and raised in New York, been here my whole life. It shows me as having lived in California, living in Colorado, and I'm like, I've never lived there. And then when I try to fight it, their attitude is if they sent mail there and somebody didn't put it in the mailbox saying return to sender, nobody here, as far as they're concerned, you live there. I have no way to fight this. So there's been years of this. And I'm always like, how do I know someone's not using my name? Because I had a psycho ex that I went and did that. And it's like, I can't even fight this. It's ridiculous. There's not enough being done to help the innocent people, so having more advanced ways of proving who you are is definitely needed.
Well, the problem with solving the problem, and the problem with a lot of inventors and inventions that I see, is that they just don't focus in on the business. You can't make us safe online if your invention isn't something that the services that we use want to use. You see, so it's one thing to say, oh, I'm going to blockchain your identity. I'm going to take it out of these services. They don't want that. Okay. If you want to make yourself and others safe online, you have to come up with a way that the services we use want to use it, right? If it doesn't provide them value, then great. We as consumers, we all want to control our identity. Of course we do, you know? I mean,
yeah, I mean, we're limited at what we have control of, so that's pretty important, though.
Right. I mean, who wants to surrender private information and have somebody review you and then tell you that you're not really you, or that you have to surrender more information, right? I mean, all of that.
But you know, it gets tricky.
Sucks.
I had an issue with my Cash App. I don't use them anymore. It was the same thing. Somebody hacked my Cash App. We're taking all this money, and I had to go through this process of doing a video of my face in every which direction, blah, 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 submit it. As far as they were concerned, it wasn't me. I'm like, how on earth is this not me? This is me. And it got to the point I don't use them anymore, because I'm like, so you're just allowing somebody to just steal my money, and that's okay. I'm showing you it's me. I'm showing you my driver's license, passport, video, and that's not sufficient. I'm like, whatever, don't use them anymore.
Right. What we would prefer is a preponderance of evidence that we are, in fact, the person that we claim, and we'd like to be able to lock down our digital properties, so that other people can't go and claim them as theirs.
For sure.
Right. Half the time, people are just hacking into, you know, something, and then they're using that to parade around whatever mechanism they can make to make a disposable profile.
Right.
Then their crimes are simply traced to somebody else. And you're right. We people, consumers, and nice, legitimate folks bear all the burden. We get the stuff taken, turned off. My wife's credit was damaged when this guy stole her money because she didn't want to pay Venmo, you know. So there's a dispute. So where's his dispute? We can't find him because he got a new phone number and a new email. You know, he's gone. That's it. Right? So what's going to happen? So she can't use that service anymore just because, you know, she got into this dispute, and there's no winning for her because it's just done. So yeah, I think if we're going to secure the future world, we have to find ways that the services that we use, you know, want to adopt something, and you know, the why of it. This is just because we, entrepreneurs, inventors, business people, we're the music makers, right? We're the dreamers of dreams.
It's needed.
This is post-COVID is a new future world that we must secure, and this is the time, you know, that people like us have to stand up and do it. It's just one of those things.
Yeah, for sure. Now, how has the industry changed since you first demoed the first app store to Steve Jobs in '93?
Well, aside from putting 67 billion transistors on a chip, you know, I mean, I feel that we are closing a circuit that happens to feel like sort of my lifetime, where when I was young, we had LPs. We tuned into radio stations. Every example I can think of media or other digitizable phenomenon has become commoditized to a degree. Everyone. Here we are on a video call.
I know. Who did this 5 years ago?
And in 5 or 10 years, I hope that this stuff will look like the early web's animated GIFs of postage stamp size images. So, you know, I think what's changed is that we have gone entirely digital as you know, as a society. And I think the most exciting and interesting thing, outside of identity and TrueAnon, of course, it's just the advent of networked services, APIs. Ours is one of them, but you know, you can get artificial intelligence, natural language processing, image processing, these other things, and you can create in ways that I believe the future of software, the future of invention that is going to change the way that we all live. This belongs to the creatives now.
Right.
It is no longer the wizardry of you know, that domain alone.
Right.
There are tools that you folks, young folks especially, look at the world differently, imagine a better place, because you can do some really neat things by tying together stuff that's already around right now and in the next 10 and 20 years. I can't wait to see what you guys create. I feel like this is where I'm hoping to check out. You know, some people in their 70s, but you know, I'm hoping that a new generation is really going to create some great stuff.
I know, so am I. I'm like, it's good times.
Yeah, it sure is.
So now, speaking of that, what advice would you give to developers looking to create their own revolutionary products or services?
Oh, stick with it. I think the only thing I've ever regretted in my own inventions is that timing is everything. It's like dating. In fact, you know, you could even say the App Store, we were a little too early to you know, the end of that story that I don't always tell people, but I'll tell you business and entrepreneur types. Of course, what am I doing at a startup in Seattle demoing that to Steve Jobs? That's the end of the road. That was the fire sale. That was the Hail Mary pass that you do when your startup is essentially out of runway, right? We spent a lot of money. That was a very expensive and time-consuming product to create. And so in a way, that was a sad time. It was the end of the road. I was going on to other things, and we had essentially failed. I had stepped up to the plate and swung, and it did not work. I handed that off. So I allow people to imagine that I'm responsible for all the success that the App Store has created. You know, much of that, of course, goes to Steve Jobs. If I was able to do that, we would have, and it wouldn't be his thing.
But that's where you have to communicate with other people.
It's a stick with it thing. If you give up and don't view your success and failure like normal people do, it's not where it's going to come from. Imagine at the end of your life how you will feel knowing that your inventions have come to pass and be real. That's the only thing that's going to keep you going.
Right. No, but I mean, it's great. I mean, there's a lot of people like that, and you have to have that vision initially. And if you can only get it so far, that's just someone else can come in and help you get it further. So it's just never I was a daughter where it didn't happen and just continue on in a different path. You have that vision, you have to, if you can only get it so far, go with other people who can maybe help get you over that,
That's true. And in fact, that is the success story behind the failure story of that App Store story. Not only was it 10 years before anyone cared to ask about the story, right? It wasn't important in people's minds yet, but it was coming more so. And yet, of course, at the time, it was a business personal failure. But you're right. What was I doing? I was not going to let that thing die. Who could understand it after everyone else laughed at us, after we didn't make our numbers, after we were humiliated as a startup in front of our investors and our backers, and in front of our own teams? Okay, there was no social network cameras following us around. There was no Shark Tank giving us deals. This was hard hours every day, 7 days a week for years. And that was the end of the road. But it was worth every last moment to ensure that Steve Jobs sat down and saw that thing.
Nice.
And I would not stand for anything less.
Right. No, I mean, that's even awesome that he acknowledged it, I mean, he doesn't give attention to everybody. So, I mean, that was awesome that he did.
People ask me, how did you get an audience with Steve Jobs? I think that was the legitimacy of being the inventor. I'm not a salesperson. I don't look like one. Right. And I said to him, look, I busted my ass on this software. You should see it. Yeah. And he looked at me and he said, okay. And I was like, oh!
That's awesome. But I think he appreciated that. He didn't want to be sold to. He wanted to see what you're making, because that's the kind of businessman that he was,
I think he saw that this was an opportunity to connect with an inventor at a time when there was a need for inventions. So yeah, he was going to see it. It didn't take more than a few minutes. And, the only thing he said about it, I like it. And then he just walked away.
Okay, well, that holds some weight.
But yes, this was enough to tell all the people watching him,
right?
I like it. Okay, then
worth
we
looking
get
at.
People on the phone, and we work out some business arrangement, and that was how it happened. It's very unglamorous.
Nice, unglamorous, but it served the point, so that was good.
It does, and I appreciate your helping me think of it as more of a success.
Well, I mean, he could have just walked away from you like you didn't even exist, and he didn't do that. I mean, that definitely means something.
But that's true, in which case we would not be having this story about success today. So I'm going with it. It's very successful.
It's successful. There you go. And it's definitely something that's well needed. I mean, there were scammers everywhere, but I think post-COVID, when everybody had nothing else better to do with their time, they've just quadrupled. So it's something that's definitely needed.
Yeah, it's sad that it's just another one of those online gig economy businesses. Sit at home and rip people off.
Yeah.
How easy it is to do. So yes, it is an important mission. It's one that we take very seriously. By the way, if there are folks in your audience who want to join us, please do. It's nice. A worthy cause. So I hope we can all secure a future world that is more safe for ourselves and our children.
For sure. Now, what are some of the biggest opportunities you see for entrepreneurs in the tech industry today?
Oh, gosh. Well, I think it really touches back on what I was saying earlier about the creativity involved. I think we're on the verge of a new generation of creativity. This may be personal tools. It may be business tools. I think we've lived with a notion that computers are essentially a 1990s thing. There's PowerPoint, there's Word, there's Excel, right? And we've kind of taken those into the world of Google Docs and other things. But there's a new generation of tools. There's a new generation of media. There's a new generation of artificial intelligence, which in itself is 3 or 5 very distinct categories of amazing things. Right. So I think the opportunity is to apply creativity in ways that perhaps have not yet been discovered. There is something waiting in this opportunity. And I can tell you from all the years that I've worked with technology, there is a certain smell about certain things. And the internet and the web was a truly inspiring time. That was also invented on the same computer as the App Store. And it was kind of our little world for a while. Right. So I think I've never experienced that amount of excitement until right about now. And I think this is just so much bigger. It really is global. People can do things that change the world. This is such an exciting opportunity.
It is indeed. Now, I'm going to put your contact info in the end of this, but if you want to tell people how they could get in touch with you or learn more about you.
Absolutely. You should visit truanon.com. That's Truanon. And not QAnon, the opposite. And you're welcome to email me. There's a hello@truanon. There's also J Tayler. That's my personal address, Tayler. And if you're interested in the service because you run social media or you have these kinds of fraud issues, or you're just interested, there's a page on the site that you can get to that'll just put you in touch with us. So you're welcome to use that as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for being on the show. Again, that was Jessie Tayler of TrueAnon. Thanks for listening to Successful Minds with Patty B. Never miss an episode by subscribing to the channel here. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you for listening to Successful Minds with your host, Patricia Baronowski-Schneider. Please leave your feedback and visit strategicadvisorboard.com to get the latest and greatest business advisement on the planet. Follow us on social media for updates, and we'll see you on the next episode.